Hey guys, tonight we are going to do something a little different. We aren't touring a gilded palace or walking the marble halls of a senate. Instead, we're going to shrink ourselves down. Way down. We're going to become small, overlooked, and almost invisible, stepping into the worn-out shoes of a child during one of history's most chaotic and transformative periods, the British Industrial Revolution. Now, I have to be honest with you. Your chances of making it through this experience with all your limbs and health intact are statistically not great. But hey, it's just a story, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. While you're at it, drop a comment below with your city and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The world you're about to leave doesn't feel like a pastoral idyll. That's a term for poets and painters. For you, it's just home. It's the smell of damp earth after a rain, the sharp scent of wood smoke clinging to your clothes, and the ever-present, slightly sweet smell of livestock. You know the dip in the path that always collects water, the one particular stone in the wall that's perfect for sitting on, and the way the wind sounds when it whips across the open commons. It's a life dictated by the sun and the seasons, a rhythm that has felt eternal, but that rhythm is breaking. The fields, once a patchwork quilt of small family strips and common grazing land, are changing. Hedges and stone walls are shooting up where they never were before, creating vast, neat squares of green. That common land, where your family grazed its once chronic cow and you foraged for firewood, is no longer common. It belongs to a landlord you've never met. This process, the great enclosure of land, has been happening for a while. A slow-motion catastrophe for families like yours. Your father can't farm anymore. The cow is gone. The firewood is harder to get. The quiet desperation in your small cottage has become a low, constant hum, louder than any bee in the summer meadow. Then the whispers start. They come from a cousin who left last year, carried back by a traveling tinker. Whispers of a place called Manchester. A city so big it's like 100 villages crammed together. A place with jobs. Not seasonal jobs, dependent on a good harvest, but jobs that pay a wage every single week. The whispers paint a picture of endless work in giant buildings called mills, where machines spin cotton faster than 100 women. They talk of money. Not a lot, but enough. Enough for bread every day. Enough to not be hungry. Your parents talk in no voices after you've gone to your straw mattress. You pretend to be asleep, catching fragments of their conversation. No choice, your father says, his voice rough with a weariness that seems to have settled deep in his bones. Your mother's replies are softer, laced with fear. Historians, a couple of centuries from now, will debate the exact balance of push and pull factors that drove this great migration from the countryside to the city. They'll argue whether people were lured by the promise of a better life or simply starved out of their old one. For you, lying in the dark, it doesn't feel like a debate. It feels like a giant, invisible hand is pushing your family off the land you've known for generations. The pull of the city is less a siren's call and more the only lifeline you can see. The day you leave, the sky is a flat, indifferent grey. You don't have much to pack. A spare shirt, a wooden spoon, a hard lump of dark bread wrapped in cloth. Your mother presses a smooth, grey stone from the riverbed into your palm. For luck, she whispers, her eyes avoiding yours. It's a small, silent ritual, a piece of your old world to carry into the new. You don't look back as you walk away from the cottage. There's an old superstition that a long, lingering look back invites misfortune to follow you. You just clutch the stone in your pocket, its familiar smoothness a tiny anchor in a sea of uncertainty. The journey is long. You are walking. Maybe you get a short ride on the back of a farmer's cart, the wooden wheels groaning under the weight, but mostly you walk. The road is muddy and crowded. You see dozens of other families just like yours, their faces etched with the same mixture of hope and fear. No one talks much. There's a shared understanding that you're all part of the same silent, shuffling exodus. Each evening, you huddle together by the side of the road, gnawing on your hard bread, the cold seeping up from the ground. As you get closer to your destination, the air begins to change. It's a subtle shift at first. A faint, acrid taste. Then you see it on the horizon. Not a mountain range, but a permanent, dark brown cloud that smudges the sky. Beneath it, a forest of brick towers, each one puffing out a plume of black smoke. This is it. This is the new world. That distant smudge of smoke on the horizon is now your entire world. As you step from the muddy track onto the hard, uneven cobblestones of the city, the first thing that hits you isn't the sight but the sound. It's a physical weight, a constant, grinding, chattering, hissing roar that presses in on you from all sides. In the country, silence was a blanket. Here, the noise is a cage. It's the clatter of 1,000 looms, the rhythmic thud of steam engines, the screech of metal on metal, the rumble of iron-shod wheels on stone, and a symphony of human shouting that never seems to cease. You feel a headache starting to bloom behind your eyes. Then you look up. The sky you've known your whole life, that vast, open expanse of blue, grey, or stardust dead black, is gone. It's been replaced by a low, permanent ceiling of brownish-yellow smoke, laced with black soot that falls like a constant, greasy drizzle. You can taste it in the back of your throat, a sharp, chemical bitterness mixed with coal dust. The buildings are squeezed together so tightly, they seem to be holding each other up, creating narrow canyons where the sunlight barely penetrates, even at midday. They are all made of brick, but you can't tell their original color. Everything from the grandest facade to the humblest wall is coated in the same uniform of black grime. This isn't a city of brick, it's a city of soot. The air itself is thick with smells that assault your senses. The ever-present coal smoke is the bass note, but woven through it are the sharper scents of unwashed bodies, rotting garbage piled in alleyways, and the foul, eye-watering stench rising from the gutters that run down the center of the streets. You pass a bridge over a river, but the water below isn't water. It's a sluggish, opaque liquid, dyed a shade of purple-brown from the effluent of a nearby dye works. Unsettling details of city life. Rivers have colors and none of them are natural. Historians much later will marvel at the sheer amount of industrial and human waste that was simply poured into the waterways, turning them into open sewers. For you, it's just another piece of this bewildering, monstrous new reality. The crowd is a river of its own, and you are just a piece of driftwood caught in its current. People rush past you, their faces pale and taut, their eyes fixed forward. No one makes eye contact. No one smiles. Everyone is in a hurry. You are jostled, pushed, and nearly knocked over by a man carrying a heavy sack. You clutch the pocket with your mother's stone. A small, hard point of reality in this dizzying chaos. Everyone looks tired. Even the children, their faces smudged with dirt, have the old, weary eyes of their parents. You see no fields, no trees, no patches of green. The only nature here is the relentless, grimy weed of humanity, growing in every crack and crevice. It's a strange contradiction, one that academics will debate for centuries. Was this era a testament to human ingenuity and progress, or a descent into a new kind of hell? As you stumble through the suffocating streets, you might catch a glimpse of a massive, ornate building, a new town hall or a banker's exchange, with carved stone lions and giant pillars trying to mimic ancient Rome. These structures were built as monuments to the wealth and power being generated here, symbols of civic pride. Yet, they stand just a stone's throw from narrow, unlit alleys where families of 10 are crammed into a single damp room. For the men who owned the factories and built the railways, this city was a miracle of modernity. For you, a child standing gawking in the middle of it all, it just feels like the world's biggest, loudest, and dirtiest trap. The initial goal was simply to arrive. But now that you're here, a new, more terrifying question begins to form in your exhausted mind, now that the scale of the place is overwhelming. It feels like you could disappear here and no one would ever notice. You are just one more small, hungry face in a sea of millions. Your father pulls you close, his hand tight on your shoulder, his own face a mask of grim determination. He is looking for a sign, a street name, anything to orient himself. But all the streets look the same, endless rows of blackened brick under a sky of smoke. The search for work isn't a search at all. You just follow the noise. You walk towards the factory that seems to be the very heart of the city's deafening pulse. It's a vast brick leviathan 6 stories high with rows upon rows of identical windows, most of them dark with grime. Steam hisses from pipes along its walls and the ground beneath your feet vibrates with a relentless, rhythmic pounding from within. At a large gate, a man stands with his arms crossed, his face set in a permanent scowl. H.E.S. the overseer, the gatekeeper to this new world. Your father, hat in hand, approaches him humbly. There is no talk of skills, no discussion of experience. The overseer's eyes flick over your parents, sizing them up like cattle. He seems unimpressed. Then his gaze falls on you. He straightens up slightly. He walks over and, without a word, grabs your arm. You flinch. His grip is like iron. He turns your hand over, examining your fingers. H.E.S. not looking for calluses or signs of strength. H.E.S. looking for the opposite. H.E.S. looking for smallness, for nimbleness. He grunts, a sound of satisfaction. Hell do, the man says, not to you, but to your father. We can take him on, as an apprentice. Apprentice. The word hangs in the air, tasting of hope. An apprentice learns a trade, a skill. A blacksmith's apprentice. A cooper's apprentice. A cooper's apprentice. That's a path to a future, a way to become a man of standing. Your father's face, etched with worry, softens with a flicker of relief. An apprentice, he asks, a hopeful note in his voice, to learn the machinery. The overseer lets out a short, harsh laugh. He'll learn what he needs to. He then lays out the terms, speaking in a rapid, take it or leave it tone. You won't be paid a wage, not really. The factory will provide you with a place in a dormitory, a daily portion of food, and the privilege of being trained. In exchange for this generosity, you are bound by contract to the mill. Until you are 21, the tiny stipend might be paid to your parents, barely enough to cover the rent on a room. But your own labor is forfeit. It's a deal that would make a loan shark look like a generous philanthropist. You are being signed on as a pauper apprentice, or something very much like it. This was a system perfected by factory owners and the parish authorities. Back in London and other big cities, the workhouses were overflowing with orphans and the children of the destitute, all of whom were a drain on the public purse. So the parishes made a deal with the devil. They would ship children by the cartload to the new industrial towns in the north. The factories got a steady supply of the cheapest possible labor, and the parishes got the children off their books. Some historians, looking back with cool detachment, argue that this was a grim but pragmatic solution to the overwhelming social problems of poverty and vagrancy. Others call it what it felt like state-sanctioned child trafficking. You might not be an orphan from a London workhouse, but the principle is the same. Your family is desperate. You are small. You are powerless. And the mill is hungry. The overseer shoves a piece of paper and an inkpot towards your father. Make your mark here. Your father can read the swirling script that fills the page. No one explains the dense legal clauses that effectively sign away your freedom, your health, and your childhood. He just sees the empty space at the bottom, and with a hesitant, clumsy hand draws an X. That single, stark symbol is the lock turning. You don't understand the legalities. You don't understand the economics. All you know is that you just watched your father sell you. You see the shame and defeat in his eyes as he avoids looking at you. He didn't do it out of malice. He did it because the alternative was starvation. He did it because he believed the lie, or at least he desperately needed to believe it. The lie that apprentice meant opportunity, not servitude. The lie that this roaring, smoking monster of a building was a place of work and not a prison. The promise of the city, which had seemed so distant and abstract, has now become a terrifyingly concrete contract, signed with an X. Your new life is about to begin. Your new home is not a house, or even a room in one. It's a place called the Apprentice House, a long, low brick building standing in the shadow of the main factory, its windows small and barred like a jail. The air inside is thick and stagnant, heavy with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, and cheap, greasy stew. There is no privacy here. There are no corners to call your own. The main room is just a vast, echoing space filled with rows and rows of long wooden bunks, stacked 3 high. This is where you will sleep. The overseer's wife, a stern woman with a face that looks like it's been soured by vinegar, points you to an empty spot on a top bunk. That's yours, she says, her tone leaving no room for questions. You look at the bed. It's a thin, lumpy sack filled with straw, laid over hard wooden slats. The straw is packed down and smells faintly of mold. There's a single thin, greasy blanket. That's it. You can see the dark shapes of lice moving in the seams of the mattress. You will be sharing this small, miserable space with a rotating cast of other boys because the beds, like the factory machines, are never allowed to go cold. As one shift of children leaves for the factory, another shift, exhausted from their own 16 hours of labor, tumbles into the still warm bunks. It's a system of maximum efficiency and minimum humanity. You look around at the other occupants. Boys and girls of all ages, from as young as 6 or 7 to teenagers who are already starting to look stooped and old. Their faces are pale and smudged with dirt, their hair matted. Some are too tired to speak, just staring blankly at the wall. Others are huddled in small groups, whispering. Their voices are low, conspiratorial buzz beneath the general din. There's an immediate, unspoken hierarchy here. The older, tougher-looking kids take the better spots, the ones away from the drafty door. You, as the new arrival, are at the very bottom of this food chain. Your first meal is ladled out of a giant, steaming cauldron. It's a greyish, watery gruel, perhaps an oat-based porridge, with a few unidentifiable lumps floating in it. It's served in a tin bowl that has a permanent film of grease on it. You're handed a chunk of black, dense bread to go with it. You're so hungry that you devour it without a second thought, the rough bread scraping the roof of your mouth. This, you will soon learn, is the standard fare. Breakfast is porridge. Lunch, if you get it, is more porridge, often eaten on the factory floor. Dinner is porridge, maybe with a small piece of boiled bacon or potato on a good day. It's cheap, it's filling, and it provides just enough fuel to keep a child's body working. Nutrition isn't a consideration. The sanitation or lack thereof is staggering. In one corner of the yard, there's a row of foul-smelling privies, little more than sheds over a deep, open pit. They serve hundreds of children and are rarely cleaned out. The water comes from a single pump in the yard, the same water that will be used for washing, drinking, and cooking. Cholera and typhoid are words you don't know, but the diseases themselves are a constant, lurking presence in places like this. Sickness is common. A child with a hacking cough is ignored. A child with a fever is told to get back to work. Only when a child is too ill to stand are they given any attention, and even then, it's often just a matter of isolating them to stop the spread. Historians still debate the true motivations of the factory owners who built these apprentice houses. Some argue it was a form of paternalism, a genuine, if misguided, attempt to provide for their Jews, showing expenses for food and even a Sunday school teacher. Others argue it was pure, cold-hearted economics. By controlling the housing, the food, and every waking and sleeping moment of their workers, they created a perfectly contained, exploitable labor force, cutting out the messy complications of family life and market wages. There's a bizarre and somewhat chilling piece of trivia here. Some of the more enlightened factory owners actually took pride in their apprentice houses, seeing them as models of social engineering. They would even give tours to visiting dignitaries, showing off how they had brought order and industry to the lives of these poor, unfortunate children. Standing in this loud, foul-smelling room, looking at your louse-ridden bed, you probably have a different opinion. This isn't a home, it's a holding pen. It's a warehouse for children. You don't sleep. The combination of the lumpy mattress, the scratching of the lice, the snores and whimpers of dozens of other children, and the sheer, overwhelming terror of your new reality keeps you wide awake. You lie there, clutching the river stone in your pocket, its coolness a ghost of your past life. It feels like you only just closed your eyes when a sound slices through the pre-dawn gloom. So loud and piercing it feels like it's vibrating. It feels like it's vibrating inside your skull. Or perhaps a bell rung with furious, insistent violence. It's 4:30 in the morning. There is no gentle waking. One of the overseers, the same scowling man from the gate or another just like him, strides through the dormitory, banging a heavy stick against the wooden bed frames. Out! On your feet, you lazy slugs. He bellows, his voice hoarse. There's a frantic scramble as children tumble out of their bunks. You learn your first lesson of factory life: slowness is a sin. Anyone who hesitates or moves too sluggishly gets a sharp rap with a stick. You swing your legs over the side of the bunk and drop to the cold, grimy floor, your heart pounding. The air is frigid. There's no time to wash, no time for anything but pulling on your clothes, the same rough-spun shirt and trousers you were wearing yesterday. You join the river of children shuffling out into the yard. A watery, lukewarm porridge is sopped into your bowl. You have to eat it standing up, gulping it down as fast as you can before you're herded towards the factory gate. The sky is still a deep, inky black, dotted with a few faint stars that are barely visible through the perpetual smog. The only light comes from the gas lamps hissing on the factory walls, casting long dancing shadows. As you're funneled through the gates, the sheer scale of the building up close is intimidating. It seems to blot out the sky. The noise, which was a dull roar from the dormitory, intensifies with every step, becoming a physical assault on your eardrums. You step through a doorway into the main spinning room, and the world dissolves into a bewildering whirlwind of motion and sound. It's a forest. But instead of trees, there are hundreds of spinning mules long, intricate machines of iron and wood, stretching in neat rows as far as the eye can see. Each machine is a flurry of activity: wheels turning, gears grinding, spindles whirling at dizzying speeds. The air is hot and humid, deliberately so, to keep the cotton threads from snapping. And it's thick with cotton dust, a fine white powder that hangs in the air like a dense fog, catching in the gaslight. You take your first breath and immediately start to cough, a dry, hacking cough that feels like you've inhaled sand. An older boy next to you, seeing your reaction, just gives you a grim, knowing look. You get used to it, he mutters, though the dark circles under his eyes and his own shallow breathing suggest otherwise. This is a moment of sensory overload that is almost impossible to process. The noise is so loud you can't hear the person next to you speak. You have to shout directly into their ear. The heat is oppressive. The air is unbreathable. And everywhere there is movement. The carriages of the spinning mules slide back and forth, a relentless, hypnotic, and terrifying rhythm. It's into this mechanical jungle that you are thrust, a small, bewildered child, on your very first day. There's no orientation, no safety briefing. Your training will happen on the job, in the heart of the chaos. An overseer grabs you by the collar and shoves you towards one of the massive machines. Your working life, a life you will measure not in days or weeks, but in the shrill blasts of the factory whistle, has begun. The sun hasn't even begun to rise. Your first job has a deceptively simple name: scavenger. The overseer, a man named Mr. Hat-2, whose face is a permanent mask of impatience, doesn't waste time on explanations. He points to the space underneath a giant, cuttering spinning mule. There he grunts, his voice barely audible over the din. Cotton falls. You pick it up. Don't get caught. That's your entire job description. You look at the space HES pointing to. It's a gap no more than a foot high, between the floor and the heavy, sliding carriage of the machine. This carriage, a massive wooden andiron frame weighing hundreds of pounds, is constantly moving. It rolls out towards you on a track, pauses for a moment as the threads are spun, and then rolls back in, right to the edge of the stationary part of the frame. The gap you're supposed to crawl into appears and disappears with the rhythm of the machine. It's a mechanical mouth, opening and closing over and over again. Fear, cold and sharp, cuts through your exhaustion. You hesitate. Mr. Hat-2 gives you a hard shove from behind. Get in there. Now. Machine won't wait for you. The choice is simple: the known pain of the overseer's anger, or the unknown terror of the machine. You take a breath, tasting the foul, dusty air, and drop to your hands and knees. The floor is slick with grease and oil that has dripped from the machinery. It's littered with cotton scraps, the very things you're meant to collect. You wait for the carriage to roll out, creating the gap. Then, you scramble in. It's like diving into a churning sea. The moment you are under, the noise becomes a deafening, all-encompassing roar that vibrates through your entire body. The air is even thicker here, choked with dust bunnies and filth. You frantically start scooping up the fluffy white scraps of cotton, stuffing them into a small bag tied to your waist. Your eyes are fixed on the carriage. Your entire existence is now measured by its movement. You have maybe 10-15 seconds at most before it begins its journey back. Your heart pounds in your chest, a frantic drumbeat against the steady rhythm of the factory. You learn to move with a speed you didn't know you possessed, scuttling sideways like a crab, your fingers darting out to grab the precious waste cotton. The overseers value this waste. Every scrap collected is profit saved. This job was exclusively for children. No adult could fit in such a small space. The factory owners and inventors, in their quest for efficiency, designed these machines with no thought for the humans who would operate them, only for the space they would occupy on the factory floor. The result was a machine that, by its very design, created a job that only a small child could do, a job that put that child in mortal danger dozens of times an hour. Historians have noted this with a kind of grim irony. The pinnacle of industrial innovation created one of the most primitive and terrifying forms of labor imaginable. During one of your frantic dashes, your foot slips on a patch of grease. You stumble, and for a horrifying second you see the carriage starting its inward journey while you're still not clear. Panic gives you a surge of adrenaline. You throw yourself backwards, scraping your elbows and back on the gritty floor, and tumble out into the aisle just as the massive frames slide shut with a deafening thud, exactly where your legs had been a moment before. You lie there, You lie there, gasping for breath, your body trembling. Mr. Hatto is standing over you, his face dark with fury. On your feet. What are you doing lazing about? He doesn't ask. You came to being crippled for life. Your failure was not the near-death experience, it was the 2 seconds of productive time you wasted by falling. He prods you with his boot. Get back to it. The fluff's not gonna pick itself up. There is no sympathy here. There is no concept of a workplace accident. There is only the machine's rhythm and the overseer's demands. You slowly, painfully push yourself back to your hands and knees. Your elbows are raw and bleeding. Your back stings. But you don't cry. You've already learned that tears are a waste of energy. You just wait for the machine mouth to open again and prepare to dive back in. This is your job. This is your life now. And the day has only just begun. The factory is a world of its own, with its own sun, its own seasons, its own gods. The sun is the hissing gaslight which never sets. The season is a perpetual sticky summer, thanks to the humidifiers pumping steam into the air. And the gods are the machines. You learn to read their moods, to understand their language. It's a language spoken in clicks, whirs, and groans. A slight change in the rhythm of a spinning mule, a high-pitched squeal from an unseen gear, these are the omens you learn to watch for. You exist in a strange, intimate relationship with the colossal piece of iron and wood you work under. You know its patterns better than you knew the patterns of the sun and moon back home. You learn the exact timing of its movements, the precise moment the carriage will start its return, the little shudder it gives just before it moves. Your survival depends on this enforced intimacy. It's a dance, a terrifying, deadly ballet between your small, soft body and the machine's hard, unforgiving one. One wrong step, one moment of distraction, and the dance is over. You see the evidence of failed dances all around you. There's a girl a few machines down, a little older than you, who is missing the top 2 fingers on her left hand. There's a boy who walks with a permanent, pronounced limp after his foot was caught for just a second. These are the lucky ones, the survivors. The stories whispered in the dormitory at night are of the less fortunate. The children who didn't get out in time. The factory doesn't stop for them, and a new scavenger is put in their place before the end of the shift. The machine is immortal. You are disposable. The concept of safety doesn't exist. There are no guards on the gears, no fences around the doctor belts that snake across the floor and ceiling, transferring power from the central steam engine. These belts are a constant, moving hazard. A piece of loose clothing, a strand of untied hair, and you could be snatched up and dragged into the machinery in an instant. This is why the overseers often insist girls cut their hair short, or tie it up so tightly it pulls at their scalp. It's not for neatness, it's to prevent them from being scalped. This particular horror of being caught by the hair is a specific and deeply seated fear in the mill. A fascinating and macabre bit of trivia from this era is the sheer normalization of these injuries. Factory records, when they mention accidents at all, do so with a chillingly detached, bureaucratic tone. A child's death might be recorded in the same ledger as a broken spindle with far less fuss. Coroner's reports from the time often listed the cause of death as visitation from God, when a child was crushed by machinery, a way of absolving the factory owner of any responsibility, not a failure of workplace safety. You learn to make yourself as small as possible to move with a fluid, almost firmness, grace born of terror. You are constantly aware of your own physical dimensions, of the space you occupy. You feel the wind of the moving carriage on your cheek, the vibration through the floorboards that signals its approach. Your senses are honed to a razor's edge, focused entirely on the machine. You tune out the screams of the other children, the gnawing hunger in your belly. The machine is all that matters. Some historians, particularly those with a more Marxist perspective, talk about alienation, the idea that industrial labor separated workers from the product of their efforts and from their own humanity. But your experience feels more primal than that. It's not just alienation, it's a form of symbiosis. You are a part of the machine. You are the soft, fleshy, replaceable component that darts in and out of its iron skeleton. You are the living gear that the engineers forgot to design. As you scurry back and forth, your small bag slowly filling with cotton fluff, you feel a strange sense of pride in your own agility, in your ability to survive each cycle. It's a grim, desperate pride, born in the belly of the beast. But for now, it's the only kind you have. After a few months of surviving as a scavenger, you are given a promotion. The word feels hollow, as it comes with no extra pay and no improvement in conditions. In fact, it might even be more dangerous. You are now a PSAW. Your job is no longer to crawl on the floor but to stand, patrol, and watch the hundreds of threads stretching across the spinning mule. The mule is a marvel of engineering. It takes raw cotton roving and spins it into fine, strong thread. But the threads, stretched taut and moving at high speed, often snap. A broken thread is a flaw in the finished cloth, a loss of profit. Your job as a PSAW is to fix these breaks and to do it instantly. You stand in the narrow aisle between two of the giant machines. As the carriage slides out, stretching the newly spun threads, your eyes scan the forest of white lines, looking for a telltale flutter. The loose spot one, you have to act in the split-second window before the carriage completes its cycle. You don't stop the machine. The machine never stops. You have to lean over the moving parts, over the whirring spindles and the sliding frame. Nimble fingers, the very things that got you hired, are your essential tools. You grab the two broken ends of the thread, and with a quick, practiced twist, you tie them back together. The knot has to be small and tight, almost invisible. Then you pull your hands and body back, just as the carriage begins to roll back in. This is a job that requires constant, unwavering concentration. Your head is bent over the machine for hours on end. The thunderous noise is still there, but you have to train your ears to listen for the subtle pop of a breaking thread. Your eyes, already strained by the dim gaslight in the dusty air, have to pick out a single errant thread from thousands of identical ones. You are a human repair kit, constantly mending the machine's imperfections. The danger has shifted. As a scavenger, the threat was below you, the risk of being crushed. As a PSAW, the threat is in front of you at eye level. If your fingers are too slow, they can be caught in the spindles, mangled or torn off. If you lean in too far, your head or shoulders could be caught by the returning carriage. And if your sleeve catches, you could be pulled into the guts of the machine. The movements are repetitive, hypnotic. You tie one thread, then another, then another. Your neck and back begin to ache with a dull, constant pain from leaning over all day. This is where one of the most gruesome and sadly common industrial accidents occurred: scalping. It happened mostly to girls, but any boy with longer hair was also at risk. If you leaned forward and a single strand of your hair was caught on a rapidly spinning spindle, the result was instantaneous and horrific. Your entire scalp could be torn from your head in a fraction of a second. It's an injury so shocking it's hard to comprehend. Yet it was a known and accepted risk of the job. Survivors were left horrifically disfigured for life. There's a curious and sad piece of historical context here. Some factory owners actually argued that the constant risk of injury was a good thing. They claimed it kept the children alert and attentive, preventing them from slacking off. It was a line of reasoning that turned a horrifying bug into a disciplinary feature. The very real possibility of losing a finger or being maimed was seen as a tool for labor management. You develop a kind of trance-like focus, your body learning the rhythm of the work. Lean, find, twist, retreat. Lean, find, twist, retreat. The hours blur into one long, continuous motion. You are no longer a boy, you are an extension of the mule. Your small fingers are the most delicate and essential part of the entire apparatus. The irony, of course, is that you are also the most disposable. If you lose a finger, there's another child from the apprentice house waiting to take your place. Your promotion hasn't lifted you up. It has just found a new, more intricate way to mesh your flesh and bone with the relentless hunger of the machine. You are no longer just dancing with it, you are now threading its needles while it threshes and grinds around you. The concept of a day as you once knew it, a period of light followed by a period of dark, ceases to exist. Your life is now governed by the factory whistle, a tyrant that cares nothing for the sun. Your shift begins long before dawn and ends long after dusk. 16 hours. It's a number so large it's difficult for a child's mind to grasp. It's not just a long day, it's an eternity spent on your feet, in the heat, surrounded by the deafening roar. You wake in the blackness of 4:30 in the morning. You walk to the factory in the dark. You start your work as a pieceur under the artificial glow of gas lamps. For the first few hours, the factory is a self-contained world, sealed against the night. Then, slowly, weakly, the real daylight begins to filter through the grime-caked windows. It's not a glorious sunrise, it's a gradual shift from inky black to a murky, smog-filtered grey. This is the morning. You see the light change, but you feel no warmth. You get no fresh air. You just continue your work, lean, find, twist, retreat. The hours of the morning crawl by, each one a mountain to be climbed. Hunger, a dull ache at first, grows into a sharp, gnawing pain in your stomach. Your legs begin to feel heavy. Your back is a knot of constant pain from the stooped posture. Around midday, a bell rings for the lunch break. It's the briefest of pauses. Sometimes you get 20 minutes, sometimes 30. There's no clean, quiet place to eat. You simply sit down on the greasy floor, right there in the aisle next to your machine, and pull out the chunk of bread and maybe a piece of cheese that was given to you as you left the dormitory. You will sit down, trying not to inhale too much of the cotton dust that settles on your food. Some factories were even more cruel, forcing the children to eat while still working, a practice known as eating on the fly. You take a bite, then rush to tie a thread, then another bite. The break is over before you've even had a chance to feel rested, and you are back on your feet. The afternoon is the hardest part of the day. The initial adrenaline of the morning has worn off, replaced by a profound bone-deep exhaustion. The heat in the spinning room seems to intensify, the air growing thicker and more suffocating. Your movements become slower, less precise. This is the most dangerous time. Your mind starts to drift. You think of the cool feel of river water on your skin, the smell of grass, the taste of a fresh apple. Painful pinpricks of light in the overwhelming darkness of your reality. A sharp shout from the overseer snaps you back to the present. Wake up, you dreaming fool. As the afternoon wears on, the weak daylight outside begins to fade. The gas lamps, which have been hissing all day, now reclaim their dominance, casting long, eerie shadows that dance with the moving machinery. The factory once again becomes its own sealed universe of light and noise, impervious to the outside world. The transition from day back to night happens without you ever leaving your spot. You watch the world go dark, through a filthy window pane, a prisoner watching the stars come out. 16 hours. 60s a week. Sunday is your only day of rest, but it's not truly restful. It's spent mending your tattered clothes, sleeping, and maybe an hour of forced religious instruction, where you struggle to stay awake while a parson tells you that hard work and suffering are good for the soul. Historians armed with documents and statistics will later confirm the sheer brutality of these working hours, but even their academic language can't fully capture the lived reality of it. It was a system designed to extract every possible ounce of energy from a child's body before it had a chance to fully grow. Finally, around 8 or 9 at night, the final whistle blows. The sound is a release, a reprieve. The machines slowly wind down, and the sudden, relative silence is as shocking as the noise was. It leaves a ringing in your ears. You stumble out of the factory gates, every muscle in your body screaming in protest. You are coated in a fine layer of sweat, grease, and cotton dust. You don't have the energy to talk. You just join the silent, shuffling crowd of exhausted children making their way back to the dormitory. You fall onto your straw mattress, too tired to even eat the watery gruel offered for dinner. You pass out into a heavy, dreamless sleep, knowing that in just a few short hours, the whistle will scream again, and the endless day will begin once more. In the long, grueling afternoons, your greatest enemy is not the machine, nor the overseer, but your own body. Sleep, thick and heavy as molasses, tries to claim you. Your eyelids feel like they have lead weights attached. Your head nods forward, and for a blissful second, the roar of the factory fades into a dull hum. Then a searing pain explodes on your ear. You cry out, instantly wide awake, your heart hammering. Mr. Hattu, the overseer, is standing over you, his face contorted with rage. He just pinched and twisted your ear with a practiced, vicious cruelty. Sleeping on the job, or we'll give you something to keep you awake. Preventing children from falling asleep was a primary and constant struggle for the overseers. A sleeping child was not a productive child. Worse, a sleeping child was a danger to themselves and the machinery. Their methods for combating this natural urge for rest were brutal and systematic. The slap, the cuff to the head, the twist of an ear, these were the daily currency of discipline. If shouting and casual violence didn't work, the punishments escalated. One of the most common was waiting. An overseer would tie a heavy weight to your neck and force you to walk up and down the factory aisles for an hour. The shame of being publicly punished was often as painful as the physical strain on your young neck and back. Other children would watch you, their faces a mixture of pity and fear, knowing it could just as easily be them next time. The message was clear: your exhaustion is not an excuse, it is a moral failing that must be corrected with pain and humiliation. For more serious offenses like repeated drowsiness or talking to another child and disrupting the work, there was the strap. This was a thick leather belt, sometimes with a metal buckle, wielded with expertise by the overseers. You would be told to hold out your hand, and the strap would come crashing down, leaving painful red welts that would sting for hours. Some overseers were known to beat children on their backs and legs. The pain was sharp and immediate, a jolt of pure adrenaline designed to shock your system back into a state of terrified alertness. There were even more inventive and cruel punishments. Some children were forced to stand in a basket and be hoisted up to the ceiling, left hanging over the working machinery for all to see. This was called being put in the spirit basket, a horrifying form of psychological torture. In some of the more notorious mills, children who were late for work might be dipped. This meant being tied by the ankles and submerged headfirst into a large cistern of cold water, often described in parliamentary reports by witnesses. Sounds like something out of a medieval torture chamber, yet it was a documented reality in the age of steam and progress. Historians have long debated the nature of this violence. Was it the sadistic whim of individual overseers, or was it a systemic policy endorsed by the factory owners? The answer, as is often the case, is likely a bit of both. The owners created a system that demanded impossible levels of productivity from children, and the overseers were the men on the ground tasked with enforcing that system. They were often paid based on the output of the children under their watch, creating a direct financial incentive for them to use any means necessary to keep the production line moving. It was a system that naturally selected for and rewarded cruelty. A strange and chilling bit of trivia is that some of these overseers didn't see themselves as monsters. In their own minds they were disciplinarians, teaching lazy and wayward children the value of hard work, much like a stern schoolmaster. They might have even convinced themselves that the pain they inflicted was for the child's own good, shaping them into productive members of society. This disconnect between their actions and their self-perception is a disturbing insight into how systems of exploitation can become normalized. After Mr. had to twist your ear, you stand there, tears welling in your eyes, but you force them back. You don't dare show any more weakness. The pain in your ear is a throbbing, physical reminder of the factory's golden rule: you are not here to rest. You are here to work, and your body's needs are irrelevant. The fear of the next punishment is a far more effective stimulant than a full night's sleep ever could be. You turn back to the machine, your focus sharpened by pain and fear, and the dance continues. There are enemies in the factory you can see. The overseer with his crushing carriage. You've learned to navigate their dangers, to anticipate their movements. But there is another enemy in the mill. It's invisible, it's silent, and it's inside every breath you take. When you first arrived, the cotton dust made you cough until your throat was raw. Now, weeks and months later, the violent coughing fits are less frequent. You've gotten used to it. Doesn't mean it's gone. It just means your body has stopped fighting it so hard. The dust is a constant presence, a fine, white fog that hangs in the hot, humid air, illuminated by the gaslight. It settles on the machinery, on the floors, on your hair and clothes. At the end of the day, you can wipe a thick, grey paste of sweat and cotton fiber from your skin. The real problem is that it settles inside you too. With every inhalation, you draw the tiny, sharp-edged fibers deep into your lungs. It's a slow, relentless silting up of your own body. You start to notice a persistent tightness in your chest, a feeling like a band is being slowly squeezed around your ribs. You find yourself getting breathless more easily. The short walk back to the dormitory at night can leave you panting, even though you're young and should be full of energy. The workers have a name for the feeling. They call it Monday fever or the Monday tightness. This is the strange and specific cold knowledge of the mills. After your one day of relative rest on Sunday, breathing air that isn't thick with cotton, your lungs have a brief chance to recover. But when you walk back into the factory on Monday morning and take those first few breaths of the thick, fibrous air, your body rebels. The chest tightness is at its worst. You feel feverish and dry. Hacking cough racks your body for hours. As the week goes on, the symptoms seem to lessen, not because you are getting better, but because your lungs are becoming numb to the assault, succumbing to the poison. You are, without knowing the medical term for it, developing byssinosis or brown lung disease. It's a specific occupational lung disease caused by inhaling cotton dust, and for centuries doctors and mill owners were baffled by it or chose to be. The fact that it was worst on a Monday led to all sorts of strange theories. Was it because the workers drank too much on their day off? Was it simple laziness? The idea that the workplace itself was the source of the illness was a conclusion many in power were reluctant to reach. Historians still argue about this. Were the mill owners truly ignorant of the long-term effects of the dust, or did they simply choose profit over people's lungs? There's evidence to support both views. On one hand, medical science was still in its infancy. On the other, the owners knew perfectly well that the air was thick with fly, as they called the waste dust, because they saw it as a loss of raw material. But in an attempt to blow the waste cotton into a collection chamber where it could be reused, the health of a child's lungs was an abstract concept. The loss of sellable cotton was a concrete entry in a ledger. They also knew that keeping the air hot and extremely humid prevented the cotton threads from snapping, which made the factory more productive. That this humid environment also made the dust cling to the lungs more effectively was an unfortunate, but accepted side effect. You see your future in the faces of the older workers. Not the overseers, but the men and women in their 30s and 40s who have worked in the mills since they were your age. They are stooped not just from labor, but from a constant struggle to breathe. They have a permanent rattling cough. Their skin has a bluish tinge from a lack of oxygen. They move slowly, as if walking through deep water. They are old before their time, their bodies wrecked by an enemy they couldn't see. This invisible foe is more terrifying in a way than the fast-moving machines. The machine can kill you in an instant, a sudden, violent end. The dust kills you slowly, one breath at a time. It's a death sentence being carried out over decades. You stand at your post, leaning over the threads, and each one is a necessity for life. And each one is a necessity for life. And each one is a small, incremental step towards a slow, suffocating death. In the vast, monotonous desert of the 16-hour workday, the midday break is an oasis. A mirage, perhaps, given how quickly it vanishes, but an oasis nonetheless. The machines wind down to a temporary halt, and the sudden quiet is a physical relief, a weight lifted from your ears. This is your 20 minutes, maybe 30 if the overseer is in a charitable mood. There is no cafeteria, no break room. You eat where you work. You find a patch of floor in the aisle that's slightly less black with grease, and you sit down, your back against the cold iron frame of the silent machine. The air is still thick with cotton dust, which immediately begins to settle on your food. Your hands are filthy, coated in a mixture of oil, sweat, and grime. There's no time or place to wash them. You just wipe them on your trousers and pick up your meal. The food itself is a testament to minimalist sustenance. It's almost always the same, a hunk of oat cake or a dense, dark bread. Sometimes, if it's a good day, it comes with a small wedge of hard, crumbly cheese, or on a truly exceptional day, a cold, greasy slice of boiled bacon. You guard this meager portion jealously. Older, stronger children are not above snatching food from the small ones. You learn to eat quickly, hunched over your lap, turning your back to the aisle. The meal is washed down with a tin cup of water from a communal barrel in the corner. The water is often lukewarm and has a faintly metallic taste from the barrel, but it's wet and it soothes your dry, dusty throat. On some occasions, you might get what's called small beer, a very low alcohol, watery beer that was often considered safer to drink than the water. This short break is not just for eating. It's a moment to let your body uncoil. You stretch your aching back, rub your sore legs, and give your eyes a rest from the strain of focusing on the threads. You sit in a state of semi-conscious exhaustion, simply trying to gather enough energy for the second half of the eternal day. Conversation is minimal. The noise of the factory floor discourages talking, and you've been conditioned by the overseers to see any conversation as a punishable offense. But in the relative quiet of the break, a few hushed words might be exchanged with the child sitting next to you. Hat TOS in a foul temper today. Did you see the new boy HES from London? These are small, fleeting moments of connection in a world designed to isolate you. You learn about each other not through long conversations, but through shared glances, a nod of understanding, the silent acknowledgement of a mutual unspoken misery. One of the more peculiar historical details about factory food is the Yorkshire tinner. In some regions, workers would bring their lunch in a lidded metal box, a tinner. They would place this box on the factory's steam engine boiler in the morning, and by lunchtime the heat from the engine would have warmed their meal. It's a strange image. The same steam power that drove the relentless machinery also served as a crude, communal microwave. It's a testament to human ingenuity in the face of grim conditions. But for you, an apprentice living in the dormitory, you eat what you're given, and what you're given is designed for one purpose only: to be the cheapest possible fuel to keep you working. There is no thought of nutrition, let alone carbohydrates, for quick energy, but severely lacking in vitamins and protein. This chronic malnutrition had devastating long-term effects. It stunted growth, weakened the immune system, and led to deficiency diseases like rickets, which caused bones to soften and bow. The skeletal deformities seen in so many former child laborers were a direct result of this combination of backbreaking work and a diet of bread and gruel. Historians looking at factory ledgers can calculate the exact cost of feeding an apprentice child down to the last farthing. They can see the logic spend just enough to keep the worker functional, but not a penny more. It was an equation of human life balanced against profit, and the scales were heavily tipped. The bell rings again, its jarring clang signaling the end of your 20 precious minutes. It feels like you only just sat down. With a groan, you push yourself to your feet. Every joint protests. The dull ache in your stomach has been temporarily silenced, but the profound weariness remains. You take a final swig of water and turn back to face the machine. The second half of your day, an 8-hour stretch of heat, noise, and pain, is about to begin. The brief, inadequate oasis has vanished, and the desert stretches on before you. Let's leave the suffocating, dusty air of the cotton mill for a moment. Don't worry, we're not going anywhere pleasant. We're just trading one version of hell for another. Imagine you weren't sent to the clattering forest of the spinning mules. Imagine your family, driven by the same desperation, ended up in a different kind of town, a mining town in Wales or the north of England. Here, the monster isn't a 6-story brick factory, but a hole in the ground. You are standing at the top of a mine shaft. It's not a grand entrance, just a raw, gaping wound in the earth, framed by a rickety wooden head frame from which a thick, greasy rope descends into utter blackness. The air smells of damp earth, coal dust, and a faint, sharp scent you can't quite identify, a mixture of explosive gases. The noise here is different from the factory. It's a lower, more guttural sound, the groaning of the winch, the clank of coal carts, and the muffled, distant thud of explosions from deep within the earth. You are perhaps 7 or 8 years old, maybe even 5. In the mines, they start them even younger than in the mills. Your small size, which was an asset for crawling under machinery, is an even greater asset here, where the tunnels are often only a few feet high. Your father is a hero, one of the men who works at the coalface chipping away at the rock in cramped, hot, and dangerous conditions. But you are too small and weak for that. Your job will be something else. Something suited to your size and your perceived expendability. The journey down is your initiation. You are crammed into a rough wooden cage with a dozen other men and boys. There are no safety bars, just a chain across the opening. The cage lurches, drops, and you plummet into the darkness. Your stomach leaps into your throat. It's not a smooth descent. The cage rattles and bangs against the sides of the uneven shaft. Water, cold and gritty, drips down on you from the walls. The faint circle of daylight above shrinks to a tiny, distant star, and then vanishes completely. You are engulfed in a blackness so total it feels like a physical substance. It presses in on your eyes. You've never known darkness like this. Even the darkest night in the country had moonlight or starlight. This is an absolute void. The cage jolts to a halt. A door is opened, and you are pushed out into the main haulage tunnel. The air is cool and damp, and thick with a different kind of dust, coal dust. It's grittier and heavier than cotton dust. You can feel it on your teeth. The only light comes from the flickering, open flame candles stuck into the miners' caps or into lumps of clay on the tunnel walls. They cast long, monstrous shadows that dance and drift, making the rough-hewn rock walls seem alive. The scale of the operation is hard to comprehend. This isn't just one tunnel, it's a labyrinth. A subterranean city carved out of the earth, stretching for miles in every direction. There are main roads where ponies can pull carts, and then there are the smaller, narrower seams that branch off, getting tighter and lower the deeper you go. It is in these cramped, forgotten corners of the underground world that children like you are most useful. Historians have often portrayed the Industrial Revolution through the lens of its great inventions, the steam engine, the power loom. But the entire enterprise was fueled by the black rock being hacked and dragged out of the earth, and a significant portion of that labor, especially the awkward, cramped, and tedious parts of it, was done by children. The academic debate here is a familiar one. Was this exploitation a necessary evil to power a nation's progress? Or was it an unforgivable sacrifice of its most vulnerable citizens? There were government commissions, like the one laid by Lord Ashley in 1842, that produced thousands of pages of testimony graphically detailing the horrors of child labor in the mines. The public was shocked, but the practices continued for years, shielded by the power of the mine owners and the grim logic of economics. You are given a small, flickering candle. It is your only companion, your only source of light. An older boy, not much more than 10 himself, is tasked with taking you to your post. He leads you away from the relative bustle of the main tunnel, down a smaller, narrower passage. The roof gets slower and lower, until even you have to stoop. The silence grows, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water from the ceiling and the scuttling of rats in the darkness just beyond the halo of your candle. Your new workplace is not a noisy factory floor. It is a place of profound and terrifying silence, and solitude. The older boy leads you down a low, narrow passageway and stops in front of a heavy wooden door set into the rock. It looks ancient and solid. "Here," he says, his voice flattened emotional. "This is your post. You're ear trapper now." He explains your job. It is, on the surface, incredibly simple. This door is part of the mine's ventilation system. The deeper tunnels need a constant flow of fresh air to push out the poisonous and explosive gases, the dreaded fire damp and black damp that seep from the coal seam. A series of these doors or traps creates a directed current of air. Your job is to sit here, in the dark, and wait. When you hear a coal cart or tub approaching, you must pull the door open to let it pass. You must shut the door again. Immediately. Leaving the door open for even a minute could disrupt the air current in the tunnels beyond, potentially suffocating the miners working at the face or allowing a deadly buildup of gas. "Don't fall asleep," the boy warns, his voice gaining a flicker of urgency. "And don't leave your post, no matter what. They'll know if you do." He hands you a length of string that's tied to the door. He shows you how to pull it. Then he turns and disappears back down the passage, his small light shrinking and then vanishing, leaving you utterly alone. And in total darkness. Your own candle was taken from you. Open flames are forbidden this deep in the mine, far from the main airways where the gas is thickest. So use it. Use it on the cold, damp rock floor with your back against the rough-hewn wall. The darkness is absolute. It's so complete that you can hold your hand an inch from your face and see nothing. It's a sensory deprivation that is both boring and terrifying. Your entire world shrinks to this single spot in the suffocating blackness. Your only stimulation is the constant, rhythmic dripping of water nearby, the damp chill that seeps into your bones, and the scuttling sounds of unseen creatures. Are they rats or are they the knockers or bogartes that the older miners whisper about, the mischievous or malevolent spirits of the mine who could cause rockfalls or lead you astray in the absence of sight? Your hearing becomes painfully acute. Every scrape, every distant rumble echoes unnaturally in the confined space. Use it for hours and hours. The concept of time dissolves. Is it morning, afternoon? You have no way of knowing. Your shift is 12, maybe 14 hours long. A lifetime of sitting in the dark. The boredom is a physical entity, a heavy weight that presses down on you. To fight it, you might sing to yourself a nursery rhyme from a life that feels a million miles away. You might run your fingers over the rough texture of the rock wall, trying to map its contours. You might count the drips of water, 1 to 3. Then you hear it, a distant trembling, the clatter of wheels on the track. Your heart leaps. You scramble to your feet, grabbing the string. A light appears, a single bobbing candle flame in the distance. It's a holier, a boy or a pony pulling a heavy tub of coal. As it gets closer, you pull with all your might on the string, and the heavy wooden door groans open. The cart rattles through, the holier giving you a silent nod. As soon as it's past, you let the door swing shut. The thud echoes in the passage. The light disappears, and you are alone again in the crushing silence and the absolute dark. This might happen a few times an hour, or you might wait for hours for the next tub to arrive. The rest of the time is just waiting. It's a job that required a child's obedience and their ability to endure mind-numbing monotony. And it was terrifying. The Royal Commission report of 1840 contains harrowing testimony from these trappers, some as young as 5 years old. They spoke of their fear of the dark, of the ghosts they imagined, of the profound loneliness. The academic world still debates the psychological impact of such work. While we can document the physical dangers of the mine, the mental toll of spending your formative years in solitary confinement and total darkness is harder to quantify. It's a form of sensory and social deprivation that would be considered torture today. There's a particular sad detail that often emerges from the testimony. Many trapper boys, when asked what they feared most, said they were scared of the black damp and odorless, invisible gas that could extinguish their imaginary light and their life without them ever knowing it was there. They were afraid of a silence that was even more profound than the one they were already enduring. Your job is to protect the miners further in, but who is there to protect you? If you are a few years older, perhaps 10 or 11, you might be spared the lonely horror of the trapper's door. Instead, you are promoted to become a holier or a potter. This means you are now part of the mine's transport system. Your job is to move the heavy tubs of coal from the coal face, where the HWRs work, out to the main haulage roads where ponies or steam engines take over. The roles sound simple enough, but the reality is defined by the geography of the mine. The richest seams of coal are often the narrowest. The tunnels leading to the face are not wide, high passages. They are cramped, low-silencing burrows, often less than 3 feet high, sometimes even lower. No pony can work in these conditions. No adult man can move efficiently. This is a job for children. You are harnessed like a beast of burden. A heavy leather belt called a girth is strapped around your waist. Attached to this belt is a long, heavy chain. The chain runs from your waist, down between your legs, and is then hooked to the front of a wooden coal tub. The tub itself is little more than a large box on for small wheels, but when it's filled with coal, it can weigh hundreds of pounds. Your workplace is a dark, narrow, and often wet tunnel. You can't stand up. You have to crawl on your hands and knees, your body bent into a painful, unnatural posture. The chain between your legs chase your spine raw. With the tub hooked up behind you, you begin to pull. It's a slow, agonizing process. Your hands, searching for grip on the rocky floor, are scraped and cut. Your knees are a mess of bruises. Every muscle in your back and legs screams in protest. The ceiling is so low that your back is constantly scraping against the rock above, the sharp edges tearing at your shirt and skin. The floor is not smooth. It's uneven rock, often with pools of foul-smelling, stagnant water that you have to crawl through. The air is thick with coal dust and choked with the fumes from your own candle, which you might carry in your teeth or stick in a lump of clay on the front of the tub, its weak flame barely piercing the oppressive darkness. This specific form of labor, the girdle and chain, became one of the most potent symbols of the horrors of child labor when it was exposed to the public. The illustrations from the 1842 Royal Commission report, showing small children, both boys and girls, crawling on all fours with chains between their legs, dragging coal tubs, caused a national outcry. The image was so visceral, so degrading, that it shocked the sensibilities of Victorian society. It was one thing to imagine children working in a factory, it was another to see them depicted as four-legged animals. And yes, girls did this work too. In many mining districts, especially in Scotland and parts of northern England, girls and young women worked underground alongside the boys and men, performing the exact same grueling tasks. They wore trousers, worked topless in the intense heat of the deeper seams, and were subjected to the same dangers and degradation. This fact, when it was revealed, added another layer of moral panic to the public reaction. In close proximity to half-naked men, were seen as a profound threat to decency and the natural order. Historians still dissect the complex social dynamics of these mining communities. They were often isolated, with their own traditions and codes. The work was hereditary. Sons followed fathers into the pit as a matter of course. From their perspective, it was simply the way things were. A child's contribution to the family wage was not a choice, it was a necessity for survival. There's a debate to be had about whether we can apply our modern moral standards to a time of such different economic and social realities. But it's hard to look at the drawing of a 10-year-old girl on her hands and knees, a chain fastened to her waist, and see anything other than profound and unforgivable exploitation. Each journey with the tub is a small epic of misery. You pull and strain, your breath coming in ragged gasps, the only sounds being your own grunting, the scrape of the tub and the eternal drip of water. And when you finally deliver your load to the main haulage way, your reward is simple: you turn around, crawl back into the darkness and do it all over again. The physical agony of being a whole IER becomes a constant, dull background noise to your existence. Your body adapts in the cruelest way, not by healing, but by normalizing the pain. But there are other fears in the mind, fears that are sharper and more sudden than the ache in your back. These are the threats that can extinguish your small life, and the lives of everyone around you, in a single roaring instant. The first is the gas. Fire dump. You can't smell it. It's an invisible demon that seeps from the coal seam, silently filling the tunnels. Your only defense, and your greatest liability, is the opened flame of your candle. The miners have a grim, practiced way of testing for the gas. They will cautiously raise their candle towards the roof of the tunnel. If the flame begins to stretch upwards, burning with a faint, ghostly blue halo, they know the gas is present. Heart-stopping terror. The very tool that gives you light is now a breath away from becoming the detonator for a catastrophic explosion. You've heard the stories. A miner, careless or exhausted, chips his pick against a rock, creating a spark. A candle is raised just a little too high. The result is a sudden deafening roar, a wave of fire and force that tears through the tunnels, incinerating everything in its path. The explosion itself is only the beginning of the horror. The blast consumes all the oxygen, leaving behind the after-damp a toxic cocktail of gases, primarily carbon monoxide. Rescuers venturing into the tunnels after a blast often find rows of miners, untouched by the fire, who look as if they have simply fallen asleep, suffocated where they sat. The second great fear is the earth itself. The mine is a fragile, hollowed-out space held open by little more than wooden props and draw hope. It is constantly groaning, settling, and shifting. The miners say the pit talks. You learn to listen to its language, the creak and groan of a timber prop under strain, the soft trickle of dust from the ceiling. These are the whispers that might precede a shout. A rockfall can happen without warning. A section of the roof gives way, burying men and boys under tons of rock and earth. The thought of being trapped, of your candle going out, of waiting in the crushing darkness for a rescue that may never come, is a fear that lies in the back of every miner's mind. In a world governed by such unpredictable and lethal forces, superstition thrives. The miners have a whole pantheon of unseen beings and unwritten rules to try and impose some order on the chaos. You must never whistle underground. The sound is said to mimic the hiss of escaping gas and tempts a disaster. It's bad luck to see a woman before your shift, and even worse luck for a woman to enter the mine itself, a belief held even in pits where girls and women worked, a paradox nobody cared to resolve. The most famous of the mine spirits are the knockers, or tomiknuks as they are called in some regions. They are the ghosts of miners who died in the pit. You hear their presence as a faint, rhythmic tapping from within the rock. Tap, tap, tap. Their intentions are a subject of constant, anxious debate among the men. Are they benevolent spirits, tapping to warn you of an impending collapse, guiding you towards a rich seam of coal, or are they malevolent, mimicking the sound of a pickaxe to lure you into an unsafe area, or worse, chipping away at the supports to cause a rockfall? You hear a faint tapping in the distance. Is it a fellow miner working in the next chamber, or is it a warning or a threat? The uncertainty is a form of psychological torture. Historians and folklorists are still fascinated by these beliefs. Were they simply old-world superstitions carried into a new industrial setting, or were they a direct psychological response to the unique and intense pressures of underground life? Some argue these beliefs had a practical, if unconscious, function. Being hyper-aware of strange sounds, whether you attribute them to ghosts or geology, might genuinely save your life by making you more attuned to the mind's talking. You also learn to watch the rats. You hate them, they are a constant presence, scuttling in the dark trying to steal your meager lunch. But you also respect them. The old miners say that if you see the rats leaving the pit, you get out too, no questions asked. Their senses, honed by generations of survival, can detect changes in air pressure or faint tremors that a human cannot. In the grim calculus of the mine, the rats are your most reliable safety inspectors. So you crawl through the darkness, dragging your heavy tub, your body aching. But your mind is just as strained, caught in a web of fear. You are listening for the groan of timbers, watching for the blue halo on a candle flame, and trying to decide if that sound you just heard was a falling rock or the whisper of a ghost. Let's leave the darkness of the pit and the roar of the textile mill and step into a different kind of factory. This one, at first glance, seems almost cheerful. We're in a matchstick factory in London's East End. The work here is done mostly by girls and young women, and the atmosphere feels different. There's more chatter, less deafening noise. The rooms are brighter, and the work itself seems almost magical. The new strike-anywhere matches that are a marvel of modern convenience. Your job is to be a dipper or a box filler. If you're a dipper, You take racks of several hundred thin wooden splints, already tipped with a chemical mixture, and you dip their ends into a foul-smelling paste-like substance. This substance is a mixture of gum, coloring, and the magic ingredient white phosphorus. It's the phosphorus that will make the match ignite with a simple scratch. If you're a box filler, you stand at a long bench, and with incredible speed and dexterity, you take the finished matches and pack them into small boxes. A skilled girl can fill hundreds of boxes in a day. The work is repetitive but doesn't seem as immediately dangerous as crawling under a spinning mule or dragging a coal cart. There are no crushing machines, no risk of explosion. The factory owners often presented this work as light, easy, and perfectly suitable for young girls. It was a step up from the workhouse, a respectable, if low-paying job. But just like in the cotton mill, there's an invisible enemy in the air. Here it's not dust, it's fumes. The white phosphorus is a volatile substance. From the moment it's mixed into the dipping paste to the moment the matches are packed, it releases toxic fumes into the air. The dipping room in particular has a strange, otherworldly quality. It's often kept dark, and the phosphorus gives off a faint, ghostly green glow. The girls who work there are sometimes called angels because their hair and clothes would literally glow in the dark when they left their shifts. They would walk home through the dark streets of London, their skin and aprons faintly phosphorescent. It sounds almost whimsical, like something out of a fairy tale, but the scary glow was a sign of a slow, insidious poisoning. You breathe in the fumes all day long. You handle the phosphorus paste, and it gets on your hands. You eat your lunch at your workbench, and you ingest trace amounts of it with your bread. The phosphorus slowly, steadily accumulates in your body. At first, there are no symptoms. You might feel a bit unwell, a bit nauseous, but you dismiss it as a common cold or a stomach bug. Then the tooth itches start. This was often the first real sign. A persistent, nagging ache in your jaw. You might lose a tooth. This was common enough in an era of poor dental hygiene, so you don't think much of it. But then the pain gets well and give off a putrid smell. The pain becomes an excruciating, unrelenting agony that keeps you awake at night. This was the beginning of a horrific industrial disease known as phos-side jaw, or phosphorus necrosis of the jaw. The white phosphorus, once it entered the bloodstream, had a peculiar and devastating affinity for the bones, particularly the jawbone. It would attack the bone tissue, cutting off the blood supply and causing it to die and rot away from the inside out. The condition was terrifying and grotesque. The dying bone would literally decay inside a person's face. Pus would leak from the gums, and the victim's breath would have a foul, fetid odor. The jawbone itself would begin to glow with a faint, greenish-white light, a phenomenon known as phosphorescence, visible in the dark. The victim was literally rotting from the head down, their own skull glowing with the poison that was killing them. Historians who have studied the records of the London hospitals from this period have found detailed, horrifying descriptions of the progression of phos-side jaw. The only known cure was surgery, but it was brutal. Surgeons would have to remove the entire afflicted jawbone. A disfiguring and traumatic operation often involved cutting through the patient's cheek. Many patients died from the infection before or after the surgery. Those who survived were left permanently disfigured, unable to eat solid food for the rest of their lives. For a long time, the link between the matchstick work and the disease was a subject of academic debate, at least from the factory owner's perspective. They blamed it on the poor hygiene of the workers, on syphilis, on anything but the highly profitable white phosphorus they used. It took decades of campaigning by social reformers like Annie Besant, who led the famous Match Girls' strike of 1888, to force the public and the government to acknowledge the truth. The strike was a landmark moment in labor history, not just because it was successful, but because it was led by a group of young, uneducated, and previously powerless girls who stood up to a powerful industry. So you stand at your bench, your fingers flying as you pack the little wooden sticks into their boxes. You often chat with the girls next to you, but with every breath you are inhaling your own destruction. The magical glowing dust is a harbinger of a decay so profound it's hard to imagine. And the worst part, you probably have no idea. You just know that old Mary, who used to work at the end of the bench, had a bad tooth and then just disappeared. The story of phos-side jaw is not just a story about denial. Let's imagine you're one of the girls in that London match factory. The toothache has started. At first, you try to ignore it. A toothache is just a toothache. You wrap a cloth around your jaw, then nightened, hope it goes away. But it doesn't. It blossoms into a deep, throbbing agony that makes it hard to eat, hard to sleep, hard to think. You know you should see a doctor, but that's not a simple proposition. A doctor costs money you don't have, and more importantly, you are terrified of what the foreman will say. If you admit you're in pain, you might lose your job, and for a girl from the East End, this job, as terrible as it is the only thing standing between you and the workhouse or worse, so you hide the pain. You try to work as usual, your face a stoic mask, even as tears of agony well in your eyes. But false-side jaw is not a disease that can be hidden for long. Your face begins to swell. Your friends might comment on it, at first jokingly. Then they start to recoil from the foul smell that you can't wash away, the smell of decay. This is the point of no return. The phosphorus has taken hold. It's actively killing the bone in your jaw. The process is a slow, agonizing decomposition. The bone, deprived of its blood supply, becomes a foreign object within your own face. Your body, in its attempt to heal, tries to expel this dead tissue. The result is a constant, oozing discharge of foul-smelling pus from your gums and, in advanced cases, from abscesses that form on your cheeks and neck. The pain by this stage is said to have been indescribable, the glowing. This is perhaps the most macabre and haunting detail of the disease. The phosphorus embedded in the dying bone would chemilumines see. In a dark room, your own jaw would emit a faint, ghostly, greenish-white light. Imagine the psychological terror of that. To go to bed in the dark, in constant pain, and to see your own reflection in a piece of broken glass, your face glowing with the very poison that is consuming you. It's a horror that sounds like it was invented by Edgar Allan Poe, yet it was a documented medical reality for hundreds of young workers. When you can no longer hide it, when the foreman sees your swollen face and smells the decay, you are dismissed. There is no compensation, no sick pay, no pension. You are simply cast out. Your productive life is over. Now you are just a burden on your family, if you have one. The only hope was the surgeon's knife. The operation to remove a necrotic jobone sequestrum, as the dead piece of bone was called, was a feat of brute force surgery in the pre-anesthesia era. The surgeon would have to saw through healthy bone on either side of the decay and remove the entire section, often a large part of the lower or upper jaw. Survivors were left with horrific facial disfigurements. They were unable to chew. Their faces collapsed inwards. Their appearance a constant public advertisement of their industrial injury. The history of how this disease was finally conquered is a case study in industrial regulation and social activism. For decades, factory owners in Britain insisted that white phosphorus was essential and that there was no viable alternative. They argued that any regulation would make their matches too expensive and would put them out of business. This is a classic argument that has been used to fight against almost every workplace safety regulation in history. Meanwhile, other countries were proving them wrong. Finland banned the use of white phosphorus in matches as early as 1872, followed by Denmark and France. They mandated the use of the much safer red phosphorus, which is non-toxic and could be used to create safety matches that only ignited when struck on a special surface on the box. The technology existed. The refusal to adopt it was purely about profit and a stubborn resistance to change. The academic debate here is less about whether the owners knew they didn't, more about the mechanisms that allowed them to continue the practice for so long. It was a combination of political influence, public ignorance, and the powerlessness of the workers themselves. It took the courage of the match girls in 1888, striking not just for better pay but for safer conditions, to finally create a public relations disaster that the companies could no longer ignore. It wasn't until Britain hosted the Olympic Games in 1908 that the government, facing international embarrassment over its far-side jaw matches, finally passed a law completely banning the use of white phosphorus in the industry. But this victory comes too late for you. You are sitting in a dark room, your facial landscape of pain, watching your own bones glow. You are a living ghost, a casualty of convenience, a footnote in the price of a penny box of matches. Let's leave the factories and mines and return to the city streets. But this time we're looking up. We're looking at the endless forest of chimneys that define the skyline of London, Manchester, or any other industrial city. Each one of these chimneys is a throat, constantly vomiting black, sulphurous smoke into the air. Unlike any throat, it sometimes gets clogged. When a chimney gets clogged with soot and creosote, it becomes inefficient and, more dangerously, a fire hazard. Someone has to clean it. But the flues of the 18th and 19th centuries were not wide, straight tubes. They were often narrow, twisting, and complex, with sharp bends and corners designed to improve the draft. An adult could not possibly fit through them. This created a demand for a very specific type of worker, a small, weary, agile child. You are about to become a chimney sweep's apprentice, or a climbing boy. You were sold by your impoverished parents, or taken from a workhouse to a master sweep. HES often a brutal, callous man, because the job requires a certain hardness of spirit. Your new life begins with a horrifying initiation. You are forced, often by being pushed from below or pricked with pins, to climb into your first chimney. The experience is a sensory nightmare of claustrophobia and suffocation. You enter the flue at the bottom, in the fireplace of a house. It's pitch black. The space is barely wider than your shoulders. You have to begin to inch your way upwards, using your elbows and knees to brace yourself against the narrow brick walls. Your only tools are a small, stiff brush you might hold in one hand, and a scraper. Your job is to scrape and brush the thick, sticky, greasy soot from the walls as you go. The soot is everywhere. It gets in your eyes, blinding you. It gets in your mouth and nose, choking you. You cough and splutter, but you can't stutter, but you can't stop. The master sweep is likely down below, shouting instructions or threats. The air is hot and completely devoid of oxygen. You are breathing in a toxic cocktail of soot, creosote, and carbon dioxide. The climb is agonizingly slow and painful. The rough brick scrapes your knees and elbows raw. These initial wounds are called getting the bleeds. Your master might even help this process along by rubbing your raw skin with salt water, a process called brining, under the horrific belief that it would toughen up the skin faster. After a few months, your joints become permanently calloused and deformed from the constant scraping. The greatest fear is getting stuck. The flues often narrow unexpectedly or have sharp 90-degree bends. It's easy to misjudge a space to get your shoulders or hips wedged. Panic sets in. You are trapped in the dark, unable to move up or down, slowly suffocating. The terror is unimaginable. Your master's response to this was often horrifully pragmatic. If you were stuck, he might light a small fire of straw or sulfur below you. Desperate effort to free yourself. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it just killed the child faster. This profession is ancient, but it became particularly notorious during the Industrial Revolution, as the cities grew and the number of coal-burning chimneys exploded. The plight of the climbing boys became one of the great social justice causes of the era. Campaigners like Jonas Hanway and later Lord Shaftesbury fought for decades to get the practice banned. They published pamphlets with heartbreaking stories and illustrations, trying to shock the conscience of the middle and upper classes who relied on these children to clean their chimneys. One of the strangest and most debated bits of trivia surrounding this trade is the idea that the sweeps were somehow immune to fire or couldn't be hanged. These were, of course, just grim urban legends, perhaps a psychological coping mechanism for a society that was complicit in such a horrifying practice. Another, more factual tidbit is the invention that finally ended the practice, the jointed chimney brush, invented by a man named Joseph Glass. His simple device of canes and brushes could do the job from below, making climbing boys obsolete. Yet, master sweeps resisted it for decades. Why the academic consensus is a mixture of stubborn tradition, the cost of the new equipment, and a cruel, simple economic fact: a child apprentice was cheaper to acquire and maintain than a patented set of brushes. If you survive the suffocation and the risk of getting stuck, you face a slower, more insidious killer. The constant exposure to the soot meant that chimney sweeps were uniquely susceptible to a particular form of cancer. It was first identified by a surgeon named Percival Alpott in 1775 He noticed that sweeps in disproportionately high numbers developed cancer of the scrotum. The carcinogens in the soot would get trapped in the folds of the skin, and over years of exposure would cause malignant tumors. It became known as chimney sweeps cancer, and it was one of the first occupational cancers to be scientifically identified. It was a miserable, painful way to die, and it was almost exclusively a disease of this trade. So you emerge from the top of the chimney gasping for air, your small body black from head to toe, leaving only your eyes and teeth a ghostly white. You have survived this time, but the soot that covers you, the soot you can never fully wash off, is a time bomb. It's another one of the era's invisible enemies, slowly poisoning you with every climb. Not all child labor happened behind factory walls or deep underground. For every child toiling in a mill, there was another trying to scrape a living on the city streets. This life offered a semblance of freedom that the factory apprentice, bound by contract, could only dream of. But it was a freedom that was just as brutal, and survival was just as precarious. Let's imagine you've escaped the factory, or perhaps your family simply dissolved into the chaos of the urban slum, leaving you to fend for yourself. You are now a street urchin. You have no home, no master, and no guaranteed meal. You are entirely dependent on your own wits and energy. Your day is a constant hustle, a search for any opportunity to earn a penny. You might become a crossing sweeper. This was a common and surprisingly formal street job. In an age of horse-drawn traffic, the city streets were perpetually covered in a thick, foul layer of mud and horse manure. At a busy intersection, you would claim a patch as your own. With a rough broom made of twigs, you would sweep a clean path through the filth for wealthy ladies and gentlemen, allowing them to cross the street without soiling their fine shoes and long skirts. You'd hold out your hand hoping for a halfpenny in return. It was a competitive business. You'd have to defend your patch from other, bigger children, and endure the scorn and impatience of the very people you were serving. Or you might be a mudlark. This was one of the lowest and most desperate of the street trades. You'd head down to the banks of the River Thames at low tide. The river was the city's great sewer and dumping ground. As the tide receded, it would expose a shoreline of thick, black, foul-smelling mud, littered with the city's refuse. Your job was to wade through this slime, sometimes up to your knees, sifting through it with your bare hands. What were you looking for? Anything of value? A piece of scrap metal, a length of rope, lumps of coal that had fallen from barges. It was a treasure hunt in a cesspool. You would work for hours, soaked to the bone in polluted water, your hands cut and scraped, all for the chance of finding a few items you could sell to a rag-and-bone man for a pittance. The health risks were enormous. The Thames mud was a toxic soup of industrial waste and human sewage. Every cut on your hands or feet was a potential source of a deadly infection. You were constantly at risk of tetanus, cholera, and a host of other waterborne diseases. Henry Mayhew, a pioneering journalist and sociologist who documented the lives of London's poor, wrote detailed and moving accounts of the mudlarkers. He described them as a wild amphibious race, living in a state of extreme poverty and neglect. There were other street jobs, each with its own niche. You could be a pure finder, a truly bizarre and stomach-turning occupation. Pure was the slang term for dog dung. It was collected from the streets and sold to tanneries, where it was used in one of the final stages of leather preparation to make the hide soft and supple. The collectors, often children and the elderly, would wander the streets with a bucket and scoop, gathering this specific, valuable waste. Historians and sociologists still study these informal economies with fascination. They were complex ecosystems with their own rules, hierarchies, and territories. They demonstrate the incredible resilience and ingenuity of people forced to survive at the absolute margins of society. The academic debate often centers on the question of agency. Were these children victims of circumstance, or were they active agents, Carving out their own lives in a hostile environment? The truth is likely a complex mix of both. They were certainly victims of a system that offered them no safety net, but their daily survival was an act of constant, creative, and often courageous effort. As a street child, you have a degree of autonomy the factory child lacks. You decide when to wake up, where to go, how to spend your day, but this freedom is illusory. It's the freedom to starve, You are constantly cold, constantly hungry, constantly in danger. You might sleep in a doorway under a bridge or huddled with other children in a packing crate for warmth. You are vulnerable to the city's predators, both human and animal. You see a finely dressed woman about to cross the street. You rush forward with your broom, sweeping a path with frantic energy. She lifts her skirt, steps delicately across the clean patch you've made, and walks on without a glance, without a coin. The hustle continues, the hunger gnaws. Your freedom is just a different kind of cage, one with invisible bars made of poverty and indifference. The years of relentless labor, whether in the factory, the mine, or on the street, are not just a thief of your childhood, they are a sculptor of your body. But this is not the work of a master craftsman creating a thing of beauty. This is a cruel, relentless force that warps and twists you into a shape that reflects your suffering. If you spent your youth as a piecer in the cotton mill, stooped over the spinning mule for 16 hours a day, your body will bear the unmistakable signature of your trade. You develop a permanent curvature of the spine, a condition known as kyphosis. Your shoulders are rounded, your back is hunched. You look old before you are 20. Your legs, which have had to endure standing for nearly the entire day, every day, from a young age when your bones were still soft, may have become bowed. Rickets, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin D and calcium, a direct result of your sunless working life, and poor diet exacerbates this. Your legs curve outwards, giving you a distinctive waddling gait. These deformities were so common among textile workers that they were often referred to as factory leg. If you were a haulie or in the mines, crawling on all fours and dragging heavy tubs, the damage is different but just as severe. Your spine might be stunted and twisted from the unnatural, crouched posture. Your knees and elbows will be covered in thick, painful calluses known as beat knee and beat elbow, a form of bursitis caused by constant friction against the hard, wet rock. Your growth will almost certainly be stunted. A life spent in the dark without sunlight, combined with a poor diet and the sheer physical strain of the work, means you will never reach your full natural height. You will be a small, compact man, your body a testament to the confined spaces you once inhabited. These physical deformities were more than just cosmetic issues. They were a source of chronic pain for the rest of your life. The bowed legs, the twisted spine, the damaged joints, they all lead to early onset arthritis and a lifetime of aches and pains. You would carry your workplace with you, etched into your very skeleton. The damage wasn't just to your bones. Your lungs, if you worked in the mill or the mine, are scarred and compromised. You have a persistent, hacking cough that will never leave you. You are perpetually short of breath. Climbing a flight of stairs feels like scaling a mountain. Your life expectancy is drastically reduced. A cotton worker or a coal miner was considered old in their 40s. This physical deterioration was so widespread that it became a national concern. During the recruitment for the Boer War and later for World War I, the British military was shocked by the poor physical condition of the young men from the industrial districts. A huge percentage of potential recruits were declared unfit for service due to stunted growth, lung diseases, and deformities directly attributable to childhood labor. This was a moment of grim revelation for the nation's leaders. The very industrial system that had made Britain the most powerful empire in the world had also physically broken the bodies of its own working class, rendering them too weak to defend that empire. Historians often point to this as a key turning point in the push for social reforms. The argument was no longer just a moral one, about the suffering of children. It became a pragmatic one, about national efficiency and military readiness. The health of the nation's workforce, it was finally understood, was a strategic asset. This cold, calculating logic, rather than pure compassion, was one of the primary drivers behind the public health initiatives and stricter factory acts of the early 20th century. But for you, this understanding comes too late. You look at your reflection in a puddle of grimy water. You see a figure that is stooped and small. You see hands, the familiar ache in your back, the tightness in your chest. You are a living monument to the price of progress. Your body is a map of your style and childhood, and every line, every scar tells a story of survival in a world that tried its best to break you. For most of your young life, your suffering has been silent, invisible to the wider world. It's been contained within the deafening walls of the factory, hidden in the darkness of the mind or lost in the chaotic noise of the city's slum. But slowly, tentatively, like the first rays of a dawn you thought would never come, a few voices begin to speak out. They are the sound of angry ink on paper. It starts with poets and writers. People like William Blake, who in his songs of innocence and of experience, writes of the little chimney sweep, black with soot but with a soul of white, a stark and moving condemnation of the practice. Or Elizabeth Barrett Browning, whose poem The Cry of the Children gives a passionate, heart-nicking voice to your plight. She asks the well-fed, comfortable people of England, "Do you hear the children weeping?" Oh, my brothers, her words, published in popular journals, are read aloud in parlors and drawing rooms, forcing a middle class that had largely ignored the problem to confront the human cost of the goods they consume. Then come the journalists' sons, social investigators. Men like Henry Mayhew, who, armed with a notebook and a powerful sense of empathy, ventures into the darkest corners of London to interview you. He doesn't just write about you as a statistic, he records your own words. He asks you about your life, your fears, your tiny, fleeting joys. His articles, published in newspapers, are a revelation to his readers. They paint a detailed, unflinching portrait of poverty that is impossible to ignore. For the first time, your voice, however small, is being heard. And then there are the novelists. Charles Dickens, the great chronicler of Victorian England, populates his books with characters who are the victims of this brutal system. You see yourself in Oliver Twist, the orphan boy sold from the workhouse, who dares to ask for more. You see your friends in Joe, the illiterate crossing sweeper from Bleak House, who lives and dies in squalor, completely neglected by the society around him, serialized in magazines unread by millions. He has a genius for making social problems into compelling, human stories. He doesn't just describe the workhouse, he makes you feel its cold, damp walls. He doesn't just talk about child labor, he introduces you to a child you come to care about. These writers are not just creating art, they are engaged in a form of activism. Their work generates public sympathy and, more importantly, a sense of public shame. It becomes harder for people to claim ignorance. The comfortable fiction that everyone is happy in their station, that the poor are poorer because they are lazy or immoral, begins to crack. Alongside the writers are the political reformers and philanthropists. Men like Richard Dostelier, who writes a furious letter to a newspaper comparing the conditions of child labourers in Yorkshire to those of slaves in the West Indies, earning him the nickname the Factory King. Or Lord Shaftesbury, an aristocratic evangelical Christian who dedicates his entire political career to fighting for factory reform. He uses his position in Parliament to launch official investigations, the famous Royal Commissions. These commissions are a crucial turning point. They gather thousands of pages of sworn testimony from you and your fellow child workers. For the first time, your experiences are entered into the official record. You might be brought before a panel of gentlemen, terrified and bewildered, and asked to describe your day. You tell them about the long hours, the beatings from the overseer, the accidents you've seen. Your simple, unvarnished testimony, when collected and published, is a bombshell. It's one thing to read a poem, it's another to read a government report, filled with the direct, first-hand accounts of 5-year-olds who work in the dark for 12 hours a day. The historical debate here often revolves around the effectiveness of this angry ink. Did these books and reports actually change anything, or were they just a way for the middle class to feel better about themselves without enacting real change? Some cynical historians argue that the reforms that followed were driven more by economic factors and fears of social unrest than by moral outrage. Others argue that this wave of public consciousness was absolutely essential. It created the political will, the moral pressure that made reform possible. It shifted the needle of public opinion from acceptance to outrage. You probably won't read these books or reports. You can treat for one thing. But you might feel their effect, a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Perhaps the overseer is a little less quick with his strap. Perhaps a visitor, a strange gentleman in a fine coat, comes to tour the factory, asking uncomfortable questions. These are small things, but they are cracks in the wall of indifference that has surrounded you for so long. The ink is still wet, but it's starting to stain the conscience of a nation. The angry ink, the shocking reports, and the growing public outcry eventually lead to something that feels momentous: a new law. You hear the older workers whispering about it, a Factory Act. It's a piece of paper passed by the grand gentleman in Parliament that is supposed to change your life. The Factory Act of 1833 is seen as a landmark piece of legislation. It's not the first attempt to regulate child labor, but it's the most significant so far. The new rules sound revolutionary to you. No child under the age of 9 is to be employed in a factory. Children between 9 and 13 are limited to working only 8 hours a day. And, in a truly radical move, they are required to have 2 hours of schooling each day. For older children, like you between 13 and 18, the workday is kept at 12 hours. On the surface, it looks like a victory. A triumph of compassion over greed. The reformers celebrate. The newspapers declare a new, more humane era has dawned. You might even feel a flicker of hope. A 12-hour day after working 16, it sounds like a holiday. But a law on paper and life on the factory floor are two very different things. The factory owners who fought the act tooth and nail are masters of finding loopholes. They're not going to let a piece of paper get in the way of their profits. The first and most obvious problem is enforcement. The 1833 Act did something novel. It created a small, professional body of factory inspectors. Just 4 of them. For the entire country. 4 men were tasked with inspecting thousands of factories, spread across hundreds of miles. It was an impossible task. An inspector might visit your mill once a year, if you were lucky. The factory owners always knew they were coming. A system of lookouts and signals would be set up. When the inspector's carriage was spotted, the word would spread like wildfire. The youngest children, the ones under 9, would be hurriedly hidden, stuffed into large cotton baskets, locked in closets, or even told to run and hide in the nearby privies. By the time the inspector walked the factory floor, everything would look perfectly in line with the new law. He would see only the older children, working at a slightly less frantic pace. He'd nod, make a note in his ledger, and be on his way. Minutes after he left, the hidden children would be pulled from their hiding places, and the 16-hour days would resume. Then there was the issue of age. How do you prove how old a child is in an era before universal birth certificates? You can't. Age was a matter of opinion. A small, malnourished 13-year-old might look 9. A tall 9-year-old might be passed off as 13. A factory owner could simply claim a child was older than they were. Parents, desperate for the extra income, were often complicit in the lie. They would coach you to say you were 13 when you were only 10. The inspectors had to rely on the judgment of surgeons who would be hired to certify the children's ages. These surgeons were often paid by the factory owners and were under immense pressure to sign the certificates. Their examinations were brief and cursory, often just a quick glance. The schooling requirement was another rule that was brilliant in theory and a farce in practice. The 2 hours of education were often held in a cold, dusty room in the factory itself, taught by an elderly, illiterate worker who was given the job because he was too old to work the machines. The school was just another way to keep you on the premises, and the quality of the education was a joke. You'd sit, exhausted after your 8 hours of labor, trying to stay awake while someone who could barely write their own name tried to teach you the alphabet. Historians have a complex view of these early factory acts. They were undoubtedly a crucial first step, establishing the principle that the state had the right and the duty to interfere in the workplace to protect its citizens. But their immediate impact is highly debated. Some argue they were largely symbolic, a paper tiger that did little to change the day-to-day reality for most child laborers for many decades. They point to the minuscule number of prosecutions and the widespread, open flouting of the rules. Others argue that even a fraud law is better than no law at all. It created a framework, a starting point for future, more effective legislation. It empowered the inspectors who, despite their small numbers, were dedicated men who meticulously documented the abuses they saw, providing the ammunition for the next round of reforms. For you, the new law is a source of bitter disappointment. The hope it briefly ignited quickly fades. The whistle still blows before dawn. The overseer still carries his strap. The days are still crushingly long. You have learned a hard lesson about power. The men who own the factories have money and influence. You have nothing, and in the contest between their power and a piece of paper, power usually wins. So here we are, standing in the middle of this chaotic, brutal, and world-changing era. We've seen the human cost up close. We felt the factory heat on our skin and the coal dust in our lungs. And this brings us to the big, uncomfortable question that historians have been wrestling with ever since: was all this suffering a necessary evil? Was the sacrifice of your childhood, and the childhoods of millions of others, the unavoidable price that had to be paid for the birth of the modern world? This is one of the most profound and enduring debates about the Industrial Revolution. On one side, you have a school of thought that, while not condoning the cruelty, frames it as a grim necessity. These historians, often focused on economics and macro trends, argue that the leap from an agrarian society to an industrial one was a messy, painful, but ultimately essential transition. They point out that life before the factories was no rural paradise. It was a world of poverty, famine, and disease, where life was, in the words of the philosopher Thomas Hobbes, nasty, brutish, and short. The factories, for all their horrors, offered a way out of that cycle. They offered wages, however meager. They concentrated populations, which eventually led to the development of modern sanitation, medicine, and education. From this perspective, the factory owners were not necessarily monsters. They were innovators and entrepreneurs operating in a fiercely competitive, unregulated market. They were driven by the logic of capitalism, which rewards efficiency and punishes waste. In their eyes, you were a unit of labor, a component in a complex equation of production and profit. Child labor wasn't an invention of the Industrial Revolution. It had always existed on farms. The factory simply made it more visible, more concentrated, and more efficient. They would argue that the wealth generated by their mills and mines ultimately lifted the entire nation out of poverty, creating the middle class and funding the empire. Your suffering in this grand narrative is a tragic but necessary footnote in the story of progress. On the other side of the debate are the social historians, who look at the story from the bottom up. From your perspective, they argue that to call this suffering necessary is to create a dangerous and dehumanizing historical apology. They contend that the level of exploitation was not an unavoidable byproduct of industrialization, but a choice made by a powerful class of people to prioritize profit above all else. They point to the fact that technologies for safety and improvement often existed long before they were implemented. The jointed chimney brush, the safety lamp for miners invented by Humphrey Davy, the use of safer red phosphorus in matches, these were all available, but their adoption was resisted for decades purely on the grounds of cost. They argue that the immense profits generated were not distributed fairly. The factory owners built grand mansions and lived lives of unimaginable luxury, while you, the children who created that wealth, lived in squalor and died young. This side of the argument also challenges the idea that life before the factory was universally worse. While farm life was hard, it often involved family units working together, with a connection to the seasons and a degree of autonomy that was utterly destroyed by the tyranny of the factory clock. The trauma of being ripped from that life, of being separated from your family and subjected to the impersonal, brutal discipline of the overseer, was a unique kind of horror. This is a debate that is, in many ways, still alive. The question of progress at what cost is not just a historical one. We see echoes of it today in debates about sweatshops in developing nations, the environmental cost of industrial growth, and the exploitation of gig economy workers. The argument that certain sacrifices are necessary for economic development is still used to justify conditions that are, by any compassionate measure, unacceptable. The academic world phrases it in sterile terms: the standard of living debate. Did the Industrial Revolution raise or lower the standard of living for the working class? In its early decades, historians pore over wage data, food prices, and mortality rates, and they still contradictory and incomplete. For every statistic showing a slight rise in real wages, there's a doctor's report describing the horrific physical deformities caused by rickets. How do you quantify the loss of a childhood? How do you put a price on a lung scarred by cotton dust? You, of course, are not part of this debate. You are the data point they are arguing over. You don't know if your life is a necessary evil or unneeded tragedy. All you know is the gnawing hunger in your belly, the ache in your back, and the constant, deafening roar of the machine that has become the soundtrack to your life. The years pass. They are not measured in birthdays or holidays, but in the relentless turning of the seasons, marked only by the slight change in the quality of the small, filtered light outside the factory window. You survive. This in itself is a small miracle. Many of the children you started with did not. They succumbed to disease, to accidents, to the slow grinding down of their bodies and spirits. But you endured. You are no longer a child. You are an adult, though your stooped shoulders and scarred hands make you look older than your years. The factory acts, once a cruel joke, have slowly, painstakingly, gained some teeth. More inspectors, stronger regulations, and the rise of trade unions have gradually curtailed the worst of the abuses. The 16-hour day is a thing of the past, a horror story you tell to the younger generation of workers who can scarcely believe it. The work is still hard. The pay is still low, but it is no longer the raw, unregulated inferno of your youth. You may have a family of your own now. You live in a cramped tenement, not far from the factory that has claimed most of your life. You look at your own children, and you feel a fierce, protective determination. Their lives will be different. You make sure they go to school, a real school, thanks to the new laws mandating public education. You watch them learn to read and write, skills that feel like a form of magic to you. You see in their healthier bodies and their brighter eyes a future that was Stovanger's or PSRS. They will not go down the mine. This is your quiet, personal victory against the system that tried to break you. Sometimes in the quiet of the evening, as the factory whistle blows to signal the end of the shift, a sound that still sends a phantom jolt of anxiety through you, you reflect on the journey. You remember the smell of the damp earth in the village you left behind, a memory so distant it feels like a dream. You remember the terror of your first day, the overwhelming noise and chaos, the constant fear. You remember the faces of the other children, the ones who shared your lumpy straw mattress, the ones who taught you how to tie a weaver's knot, the ones who disappeared. Your body is a ledger of your past, the ache in your joints on a cold morning, the wheeze in your chest when you laugh too hard, the network of fine white scars on your hands. These are the permanent records of your service to the age of steam. You are a veteran of an undeclared war, a war between progress and humanity, and you bear the wounds to prove it. Historians will look back at your time and call it an unprecedented growth. They will celebrate the names of the men who built the machines and the railways. Brunel, Stevenson, Arkwright. Your name will not be recorded in any of their books. You are one of the nameless, faceless millions who fueled that revolution with your sweat, your health, and your childhood. But, as you sit there, watching your own child read a book by the flickering lamplight, you understand something that the grand histories often miss. The true story of this era is not just the story of the winners, the inventors, and the industrialists. It's also your story, the story of enduring the unendurable, of finding small moments of grace and connection in the heart of the machine. The story of a generation that was sacrificed on the altar of progress, but whose children, and their children's children, would eventually inherit the modern world that was built on their backs. The sky outside your window is still smudged with smoke, but perhaps it's a little less thick than it used to be. The roar of the city is still there, but perhaps it's a little more distant. You survived, and in the quiet defiance of that survival, you find a measure of peace. Your shift is finally over. And now, the noise begins to fade, the relentless clatter of the looms, the shrill scream of the factory whistle, the grating of metal on stone, it all dissolves, melting away into a soft, deep silence. The oppressive heat of the spinning room cools into a gentle, pleasant warmth. The air, once thick with choking dust, becomes clear and sweet, carrying the faint, forgotten scent of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. You can breathe now. Really breathe. Slow breaths that fill your lungs without a catch, without a cough. The pain in your back, that constant, nagging ache that has been your companion for as long as you can remember, simply lets go. The tightness in your chest uncoils. You feel your shoulders, once perpetually hunched in a posture of defense and toil, finally relax and fall into a natural state of rest. You are floating in a place of quiet, a gentle, dark space with no sharp edges, no sudden movement. The ghosts of the overseers and the machines have no power here. They are just faint, fading echoes from a world that can no longer touch you. Your worn-out shoes feel light on your feet, and the hard cobblestones have softened into a path of moss and cool grass. The river stone your mother gave you, once a small hard anchor of reality, now feels warm and weightless in your palm. A smooth, comforting presence. You are drifting now, carried on a slow, easy current, further and further away from the smoke and the sorrow. You are in the dream now. Let the current take you. There is nothing left to do, nowhere left to go. The end of the article. Good night.